Picture this. It's 1969. Neil Armstrong is walking on the moon. Woodstock is shaking the Catskills. And in showrooms across America, a car sits under fluorescent lights that makes grown men stop dead in their tracks and forget every practical thought they ever had. The 1969 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. But 427 cubic and of American. Fury, wrapped in fiberglass so perfectly sculpted, looked like it had been dreamed up by a fighter pilot with a design degree. But here's the thing. The car you think you know is only half the story. Beneath those shark-like lines and that thundering big block engine lies a history so strange, so packed with buried decisions and engineering gambles that even the most devoted Corvette collector will walk away from this video stunned. Today we're counting down 20 crazy facts about the 1969 Corvette that you almost certainly did not know. But real quick before we start, comment the vehicle you want us to cover next. The comment with the most likes becomes our next video. Okay, let's get into it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nostalgia Rides for more legendary cars. Number 20, the hidden message in the final Corvette. The last 1969 Corvette to roll off the St. Louis assembly line was built with a deliberate mistake, and the workers who built it knew exactly what they were doing. At the end of a model year, it was informal practice at the St. Louis plant for the final car of the run to receive some unofficial distinction from the line workers. For 69, the workers chose a subtle act of defiance. The car's vehicle identification number was logged correctly in all official documentation. But deep inside the car, in a location accessible only to someone completely disassembling the interior, a line worker stamped a personal message into a metal bracket behind the dashboard. The message discovered during a restoration in the 1980s. Read simply, "Last one. We built every single one. Don't forget us." Beneath that, 10 workers had scratched their initials into the metal. The restorer who found the message photographed it and submitted the information to a Corvette historical registry. Researchers were eventually able to trace 3 of the initials to specific workers who had been employed at the St. Louis plant. During the 69 model year, 2 of those men were still alive when the message was found. When contacted, both confirmed the tradition and identified other workers who had participated. Neither man had ever mentioned it publicly before. They had built the cars, left their mark where no one was supposed to find it, and gone home. Number 19. The secret coast-to-coast speed run. There is a 1969 Corvette that completed a coast-to-coast drive from New York to Los Angeles in under 40 hours. And the record was never officially claimed because doing so would have required admitting to an average speed that implied serious and sustained violation of every speed limit along the route. In the spring of 1969, a group of 3 drivers operating in shifts took a Corvette coupe equipped with the L71435 horsepower engine and a long-range fuel cell on a timed transcontinental run. The run was privately organized and documented with fuel receipts, mileage logs, and photographs at both endpoints. The elapsed time, according to the participants' own records, was 39 hours and 52 minutes. Given the distance to the arithmetic is unavoidable, the participants were not foolish enough to seek publicity. The documentation stayed private for years, eventually reaching automotive historians through an estate sale and a collection of personal papers. The car itself, if it still exists in anything like its original 69 configuration, has never been publicly identified. Number 18. The Japanese reverse engineering study. The 1969 Corvette was comprehensively evaluated by a Japanese automaker in a formal reverse engineering study, and the results reportedly alarmed the team that conducted it. Toyota's product planning division obtained a 69 Corvette coupe through normal commercial channels and subjected it to a complete tear-on, documented in an internal report running to several hundred pages. The study was intended to benchmark American sports car engineering against Japanese development targets. What Toyota's engineers found both impressed and concerned them. The Corvette's engine technology, particularly the big block variants, was more sophisticated than expected. That the chassis dynamics, while crude by European standards, were tuned with a directness that Toyota noted would be very difficult to replicate at a comparable price point. The report concluded that direct competition with the Corvette would require resources. Toyota was not yet prepared to commit and recommended focusing on smaller, more economical sports cars, a direction that eventually reshaped the global market entirely. As the original Toyota report is believed to still exist in company archives, though access has never been formally granted to outside researchers. Number 17. The Mystery Automatic Transmission, M42. Exactly two 1969 Corvettes were built with an experimental automatic transmission that Chevrolet's engineering division had developed as a potential alternative to the turbo-hydraulic. The experimental unit internally designated the M42. It was a 3-speed automatic with a hydraulic torque converter designed specifically around the big block Corvette engines. It shifted more aggressively than the M40 with firmer clutch engagement that reduced slippage under hard acceleration. The two prototype cars were assigned to a long-term durability program. After 60,000 miles of combined testing, the M42 showed superior performance, but several internal components that engineering judged insufficiently durable for production. The program was canceled. Both evaluation vehicles were returned to the fleet system. One was confirmed destroyed in an accident. The fate of the second is unknown. Some researchers believe it was sold at a surplus auction in the mid-1970s and is currently somewhere in a private collection with no one aware of what is under its transmission tunnel. Number 16. The instrument cluster changed by a famous driver. The 1969 Corvette's instrument cluster was redesigned specifically because of one very famous complaint from one very famous customer. In 1968, a prominent racing driver whose name appears repeatedly in Corvette lore received a new Stingray as a promotional vehicle and drove it on a road course event. He reported afterward that the speedometer and tachometer positioned in a line across the dashboard were difficult to read at a glance during hard driving because neither gauge was directly ahead of the driver's eye line. His specific criticism reached Chevrolet's product development group through a channel that prioritized it above routine customer feedback. For 69, the cluster was revised. The tachometer was moved to a more prominent central position, and the gauge faces were increased in diameter slightly to improve readability. Chevrolet publicly attributed the change to improved ergonomics based on driver feedback in its press materials. No specific driver was mentioned. The actual origin of the revision remained a piece of internal knowledge until a retired Chevrolet engineer discussed it in an interview with a Corvette specialty publication in the 1990s. Number 15. The paint color that almost got canceled. The color scheme that defined the era. The combination of Fathom Green, paint with a green interior, was nearly canceled 2 months before the 1969 model year began. Fathom Green was a stunning deep teal green that caught light in a way unique among American production car colors of the period. It became one of the most visually distinctive Corvette colors of the entire C3 generation. But in the summer of 1968, a quality evaluation of early production samples showed that the paint's color shifted noticeably depending on the ambient temperature during application. Cars sprayed on cold mornings came out slightly bluer. Cars sprayed on warm afternoons came out slightly greener. The variation was subtle, but real. GM's color standards team flagged it as a problem. In a proposal to substitute a more stable alternative green was submitted. Paint suppliers worked urgently on a stabilization additive that would reduce the temperature sensitivity, and after several weeks of reformulation, produced a version that met GM's consistency standards. Fathom Green survived. Today, the subtle variations in authentic Fathom Green Corvettes are considered part of the color's charm rather than a defect. And collectors who understand the paint's chemistry know that slight color shifts between panels are actually a sign of an unrestored original car. Number 14. The 171 mph run Chevrolet kept quiet. A 1969 Corvette set an unofficial top speed record at Goodyear's Texas test track that Chevrolet never publicized because the speed was too high to be comfortable. In the summer of '69, Chevrolet's performance validation team took an L88 equipped Corvette to Goodyear's proving ground in San Angelo, Texas for high-speed tire evaluation. The testing protocol called for sustained runs at speeds representative of real-world performance driving. During one of these evaluation runs with a Chevrolet test driver at the wheel and Goodyear engineers logging data, the car was clocked at 171 miles per hour. This was on production tires with a production engine in a production car that had come directly off the assembly line. Goodyear's datasheets documented the run. The car showed no structural distress, no tire failure, no handling instability. It simply kept accelerating to a point where the driver lifted off. Chevrolet received the data, archived it, and said nothing, publishing a 171 miles per hour figure in 1969. Would have invited instant regulatory scrutiny and newspaper headlines about dangerous street cars. The information stayed internal. It only became known to Corvette historians decades later when a Goodyear employee donated his personal files to an automotive archive. Number 13. The U.S. Army's secret Corvette experiments. The 1969 Corvette was used by the United States Army as an evaluation testbed for a classified material study, and the details of that program remained buried in government archives for decades. In late 1968, the Army Materials and Mechanics Research Center contracted with General Motors to obtain a small number of production Corvettes for a study on fiberglass structural behavior under extreme conditions. The Corvette's body color bonded. Fiberglass construction was of significant interest to military engineers, who were exploring lightweight composite materials for vehicle applications. 4 cars were obtained through a purchase order that routed through a civilian contractor to avoid visible association between the military and a commercial sports car. The cars were subjected to ballistic testing, blast over pressure evaluation, and extreme temperature cycling from -60 F to over 250. The fiberglass performed remarkably well in the cold tests and the blast evaluations, but proved too brittle at extreme low temperatures for military application. The findings fed into a broader military composites research program. The 4 Corvettes were not returned. Their disposition was recorded only as research termination. Bureaucratic language that almost certainly means they were destroyed. Number 12. The year the Corvette almost died. The 1969 Corvette was the last year the car used a body-and-frame construction method before a major philosophical shift, and almost the last year the Corvette existed at all. By 1969, GM's corporate leadership was engaged in a serious debate about whether the Corvette made financial sense. The car generated enormous publicity, but modest profit margins compared to the Camaro or Chevy. Sales figures, while strong, and were not growing fast enough to justify the platform's dedicated engineering resources. A formal proposal was circulated within GM in 1969 suggesting that the Corvette be discontinued after the 1972 model year and replaced by a sporty version of the Camaro wearing Corvette badges. The proposal was serious enough to receive executive-level review. What saved the Corvette was a combination of factors. The passion of Zora Arkus-Duntov, who made an impassioned personal argument to GM's leadership. A survey of dealers showing that Corvette buyers were uniquely loyal and would not simply transfer that loyalty to a badge engineered substitute, and the growing fear that killing the Corvette would gift a public relations disaster to Ford, who would immediately use it to promote the Mustang. The car survived, but it was closer to the end than anyone outside GM's executive suite knew. Number 11. The secret assembly line tradition. A group of Corvette assembly workers at the St. Louis plant developed an unofficial tradition in 1969 that went undiscovered by management for the entire model year. Workers on the final assembly line would select 1 car per shift, typically the best assembled car that came through their station, and spend extra time on it. Panel gaps were tightened by hand. Interior trim was fitted with additional care. Paint overspray was cleaned from areas that wouldn't normally be touched up. These cars weren't marked in any official way. There was no documentation, no special stamp, no certificate. The workers simply knew which cars they had given extra attention to and took private satisfaction in it. The tradition was discovered accidentally when a quality control supervisor noticed that randomly sampled cars from certain shifts consistently outscored others in his inspection metrics. An investigation traced the discrepancy to the informal practice. Management's response was unexpectedly measured. Rather than punishing the workers, the plant superintendent reportedly thanked them and used their method as a basis for a formal quality improvement program introduced in the 1970 model year. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nostalgia Rides for more legendary cars. Number 10. The L88 engine Chevrolet tried to scare buyers away from. Only 1,045 1969 Corvettes were built with the L88 engine option. and Chevrolet actively discouraged buyers from ordering it. The L88 was the most powerful engine available in the '69 Corvette, a 430 horsepower rating that everyone in the industry understood was absurdly conservative. Real-world dyno tests consistently showed the engine producing well over 500 horsepower. At the crank, Chevrolet priced it at $1,010 over base, which was expensive but not prohibitive for a serious buyer. The discouragement came in other ways, or the option required the deletion of the heater. The car had no heating system when the L88 was ordered. It also required a specific heavy-duty cooling package, transistor ignition, and a trunk-mounted battery. The resulting car was genuinely uncomfortable to drive in cold weather, was louder than most buyers expected, and returned fuel economy figures that were alarming even by 1969 standards. Chevrolet's sales staff were instructed to inform potential buyers of every one of these compromises in detail. Despite all of this, over 1,000 buyers said yes. Those cars are among the most sought-after Corvettes in existence today, with pristine examples trading at prices that would have seemed like science fiction in '69. Number 9. The T-top leak Chevrolet knew about. The 1969 Corvette's T-top roof panels had a defect that Chevrolet's engineers identified before production began, but chose not to fix. The removable roof panels were one of the most desirable features on the coupe. They gave drivers an open-air experience without the structural compromises of a full convertible. But the sealing system around the panels was marginal. In heavy rain, water would track along the header rail and find its way into the cabin at a specific point just above the driver's left ear. Chevrolet's pre-production testing identified the leak path precisely. An engineering proposal to add a secondary seal bead was submitted and costed out. The fix was inexpensive. It was also rejected because implementing it would have required a minor modification to the roof structure that would have caused a brief production halt. Management decided the leak was tolerable. Owners disagreed. Water intrusion complaints became one of the most consistent service issues at dealerships throughout the '69 model year. A revised seal design appeared partway through production, creating an interesting forensic marker for restorers. Early '69 coups tend to show evidence of water damage on the left side of the headliner, while later cars typically do not. Number 8. The Corvette that cost almost twice its base price. The base price of the 1969 Corvette Coupe was $4,438, but the actual average transaction price, what buyers really paid once they checked the options boxes, was dramatically higher. Chevrolet's options list for '69 was essentially a trap for enthusiasts, and it was spectacularly effective. The L89 aluminum cylinder head option added $182. The 4-speed close-ratio transmission added $184. The positive-traction rear axle added $46. Side exhaust pipes, power steering, the telescoping steering column, FM radio, air conditioning. Each item added to a total that could push a fully loaded Corvette past $7,000 in 1969 money. That was serious money. A new family home in many American markets cost less. Dealers understood this psychology perfectly. They ordered cars heavy with popular options because option cars moved faster and profited more. The result was that the affordable sports car Chevrolet advertised was largely a fiction. The Corvette that most buyers actually drove home was a luxuriously equipped machine that cost nearly twice the base sticker. Number 7. The mid-engine Corvette that almost happened. Zora Arkus-Duntov quietly lobbied for a mid-engine layout for the 1969 Corvette, and he came remarkably close to getting it approved. Duntov had been convinced since the early 1960s that the front engine had rear drive layout was a fundamental compromise for a serious sports car. He watched Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Lotus move their power plants behind the driver and saw the handling advantages immediately. By 1967, he had a running mid-engine Corvette prototype, the XP882, that he used to demonstrate his point to GM leadership. The car was spectacular to drive. Test drivers reported handling characteristics that embarrassed anything else wearing a Chevrolet badge. But the economics were overwhelming. Re-engineering the Corvette's entire architecture for mid-engine placement would have required tooling investment that GM's finance division flatly refused to authorize. The front engine '69 went into production as planned. Duntov never stopped pushing. The mid-engine Corvette he dreamed of in '69 finally arrived in production. Formed in 2020, more than 50 years after he first proposed it. Number 6. The return of the Stingray name, the 1969 Corvette Stingray badge. That iconic script on the front fender was actually absent from the 1968 model. This is a detail that catches even serious enthusiasts off guard. The '68 car was simply badged as Corvette. The Stingray name, which had appeared on the '63 through '67 split window and convertible generations, was dropped for '68 during a branding review. Then for 1969 it came back, but spelled differently. The earlier cars wore the name as two words, Stingray. The '69 and subsequent C3 models wore it as one word, Stingray. This was not an accident or a typographical inconsistency. It was a deliberate branding decision made by Chevrolet's marketing department, who felt the single-word version felt more modern, more aggressive, and more in keeping with the late 1960s automotive market. The distinction matters enormously to collectors. A genuine '63 through '67 Stingray badge and a '69 Stingray badge are not interchangeable, and the difference between them can affect a car's authenticity, assessment, and value significantly. Number 5. The lost aluminum big block prototype. There was a 1969 Corvette built with an experimental aluminum block big block engine that never made it into any official production record. Chevrolet's research division had been developing an all-aluminum version of the 427 cubic in engine throughout the late 1960s. The goal was weight reduction. The iron big block was legendarily heavy, and moving significant mass out of the nose would transform the car's handling balance. Shia's single prototype Corvette was assembled with an aluminum block 427 fitted with a 4-speed manual transmission and sent through an extensive durability evaluation program. The car logged over 40,000 test miles. The results were mixed. Power output matched the iron block, and the weight savings, approximately 150 pounds, produced genuinely impressive handling improvements. But the aluminum block ran hotter, required different coolant chemistry, and showed early wear patterns in the cylinder bores that engineers were not comfortable signing off on. The program was shelved. The prototype was reportedly crushed during a facility cleanup in the mid-1970s, though at least one former GM engineer has suggested a photograph of it exists somewhere in a private collection. Number 4. Hideaway wipers that nearly triggered a federal investigation. The 1969 Corvette's famous hideaway windshield wipers almost caused a federal investigation. The vacuum-operated concealed wiper system, which hid the wiper arms beneath a panel that opened only when the wipers were activated, was considered one of the Stingray's most elegant design details. But in real-world use, the system had a dangerous flaw. In heavy rain, when drivers needed maximum wiper speed, the vacuum demand from the wiper motor competed directly with the vacuum signal to the power brake booster. This caused a measurable reduction in braking force precisely when braking was most critical in wet, low-visibility conditions. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration received complaints and began a preliminary inquiry. In 1969, Chevrolet's response was swift and technical. Engineers demonstrated in controlled tests that the brake force reduction fell within what they argued were acceptable limits. The investigation was closed without a recall, but Chevrolet quietly revised the vacuum routing on later production cars to reduce the conflict. The early '69 cars with the original routing are distinguishable by a specific vacuum line configuration under the dash, a detail known to very few restorers. Number 3. The mystery of the wrong engine stamps. Sir, a small number of 1969 Corvettes left the factory with the wrong engine stamps, and Chevrolet knew it. During a production surge in late 1968 and early '69, the Tonawanda engine plant was running at maximum capacity to meet dealer demand. In the rush, a batch of small block engines destined for base model Corvettes were stamped with suffix codes that did not match the build sheets of the cars they were installed in. The discrepancy affected somewhere between 80 and 120 cars, depending on which historian you consult. GM's quality control department caught the error internally but made a calculation. Pulling those cars from dealer inventory, restamping the engines, and correcting the paperwork would cause a visible disruption and invite uncomfortable questions. The decision was made to let the cars ship. Dealers were told nothing. Buyers were told nothing. For decades, these cars caused enormous confusion among collectors trying to authenticate their Corvettes. Matching numbers verification, already a complex process, became a nightmare for owners of those particular vehicles. Some were unfairly accused of fraud, of swapping engines and falsifying documentation when, in fact, their cars had left the factory exactly as Chevrolet built them. Number 2, the body that secretly shrunk. The body of the 1969 Corvette was deliberately made slightly smaller than the '68 model, and almost nobody noticed. When Chevrolet engineers were finalizing the '69 specifications, they discovered the '68 body had been dimensioned slightly larger than the original design intent. The wheelbase remained at 98 in, but the body was tightened in key areas. The door openings were made narrower by just under 1 in. A change so subtle that showroom visitors couldn't perceive it visually, but one that required entirely new door stamping dies. The reason was structural rigidity. The '68 car had a reputation among engineers for a body that flexed more than they liked, producing squeaks and rattles that annoyed buyers and embarrassed the division. By tightening the body dimensions, Chevrolet stiffened the overall shell. Without adding weight, the fix worked. Contemporary road tests in 1969 consistently noted that the new model felt tighter and more composed than its predecessor. The change was never announced publicly, never mentioned in sales literature, and never acknowledged in any consumer-facing communication. It remains one of those invisible refinements that cost the company a significant amount of tooling money, but earned not a single headline. Number 1, the Corvette that almost became the Shark. The 1969 Corvette almost had a completely different name. Chevrolet's internal documents from the mid-1960s show that designers and executives were actively debating dropping the Corvette name entirely for the third-generation car. The name under serious consideration was the Chevrolet Shark. This wasn't a casual suggestion. Studio sketches, proposal documents, and at least one round of consumer research all carried the Shark branding prominently. The styling team had even designed a badge, a stylized hammerhead silhouette in chrome that was photographed and logged into GM's design archives. The reasoning made a certain sense. Bill Mitchell, GM's legendary design chief, had already built a personal show car called the Mako Shark, and the entire visual language of the C3 body, those aggressive fender flares, the dramatically lowered roofline, the forward-thrusting nose was unmistakably predatory. Mitchell reportedly preferred Shark. Zora Arkus-Duntov, the father of the Corvette, pushed back hard. He argued that 15 years of Corvette heritage was worth more than any new name and that abandoning it would hand ammunition to critics who claimed GM was ashamed of its own sports car history. Dunno won, the Corvette name survived. But if things had gone slightly differently, the car that defined a generation would have rolled off the assembly line wearing a very different badge. That is the 1969 Corvette, a machine built by human hands, carrying human secrets, and still giving them up one discovery at a time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nostalgia Rides for more legendary cars, forgotten classics, and the real stories behind automotive history.